Close your eyes and imagine waking up in a place where survival isn't guaranteed, where every day brings dangers you've never faced before, where comfort is a luxury and safety is an illusion. Tonight, I'm taking you to the real Wild West. Not the Hollywood version with heroic cowboys and thrilling gunfights. The actual Wild West, the one that would probably kill you within a week. Welcome to the Sleepy Law Library. I'm your guide through the dustiest, deadliest chapter of American history. Before we begin, get comfortable, really comfortable. Adjust your pillow, pull up your blanket, because you're about to discover why the frontier was called wild for very good reasons. The year is 1875. You've just opened your eyes in a small cabin somewhere in the American West. Maybe Kansas, maybe Wyoming, maybe Arizona territory. The location doesn't matter much because the challenges are the same everywhere. Brutal, relentless, and often fatal. The first thing you notice is the smell. It hits you before you're fully awake. Not the fresh air you expected. Not the scent of pine trees or prairie grass. It's something far worse. A combination of unwashed bodies, animal waste, and what might be human sewage. Because bathing in the Wild West wasn't a daily ritual. It was a monthly luxury. Most people went weeks without washing. Some went entire winters without a proper bath. Water was too precious for something as frivolous as cleanliness. You needed it for drinking, for cooking, for your animals. Using it to wash yourself seemed wasteful, extravagant even. So everyone smelled. The rich smelled slightly less than the poor. But everyone carried that distinctive odor of sweat, dirt, and grime. You'd get used to it eventually, or you'd die before that happened. Either way, the smell was the least of your problems. You drag yourself from bed. The mattress beneath you isn't really a mattress. It's a cloth sack stuffed with straw or dried grass, and it's crawling with bed bugs. These tiny insects are your constant companion, biting you through the night, leaving itchy welts all over your body. There's no escape from them, no pesticide to kill them. You just accept the bites as part of life. Your body aches in ways you've never experienced. Every muscle screams. Your back feels like someone beat you with a stick. Your hands are already developing calluses even though you haven't done any work yet. This is what constant physical labor does to the body. And in the Wild West, there's no such thing as a day off. The cabin around you is freezing. If it's winter, the temperature inside might be well below freezing. You let the fire die overnight to save wood because wood is precious. You need it for cooking, for heat, for survival. Can't waste it keeping warm while you sleep. If it's summer, the cabin is already stifling hot despite the early hour. There's no air conditioning, no fan, no relief from the heat that will only get worse as the day progresses. You notice your breath misting in front of your face. The cabin has gaps in the walls where cold air seeps through. The floor is dirt, covered with rushes or straw to provide some insulation. But it doesn't help much. You're cold to your bones, standing up. You look around. The cabin is one room, maybe two if you're wealthy. Stone or wood walls. A fireplace that barely heats the space. A table. A few chairs. Some shelves holding your meager possessions. This is home. This is luxury compared to what some people have. Your clothing hangs on pegs driven into the wall. Men typically own 2 sets of clothes, maybe 3 if they're doing well. Canvas or denim pants that are stiff and uncomfortable. Cotton shirts that chafe against your skin. Everything is rough, scratchy, designed for durability, not comfort. Women have it worse. Multiple layers regardless of temperature. A chemise against the skin. Then a corset that makes breathing difficult. Then petticoats. Then a long dress that drags in the dirt and mud. The layers are hot, restrictive, and constantly need washing. But washing means hauling water, eating it, scrubbing by hand, and hanging everything to dry. It's exhausting work. You get dressed, shivering in the cold. Your fingers fumble with buttons and laces. Everything takes longer when you're this cold. Finally, dressed, you face your first major challenge of the day, breakfast. Hope you like beans, because you're going to eat beans for breakfast. Lunch and dinner. Beans, biscuits, and coffee. That's the standard frontier diet. Day after day, week after week, month after month. The monotony is crushing. Fresh fruits and vegetables, only in season, and only if you can grow them or afford to buy them. Most of the year, you're eating preserved food, salted meat, dried beans, hardtack biscuits that could break your teeth. The diet is nutritionally deficient, lacking vitamins and minerals your body needs. Scurvy is common. This disease, caused by lack of vitamin C, makes your gums bleed and your teeth fall out. It's easily preventable with fresh fruit, but fresh fruit is a luxury most frontier people can't afford regularly. So they suffer. Their teeth loosen, their gums swell and bleed, and they accept this as normal. The coffee, at least, provides some comfort. Except frontier coffee is nothing like what you're used to. It's boiled until it's bitter and strong enough to strip paint. Sometimes people add crushed eggshells or even salt to reduce the bitterness. It's awful, but the caffeine helps you face the day ahead. Before you eat, though, you need to check your shoes. This is critical. During the night, scorpions or snakes might have crawled inside, seeking warmth. A scorpion's sting or snake bite could kill you, and the nearest doctor might be days away. So you shake out your boots every single morning. It's a habit born from painful experience. You step outside, and the landscape takes your breath away. It's beautiful. Yes, vast prairies stretching to the horizon, or towering mountains touching the sky, or red desert under an endless blue dome. The Wild West is stunning, but it's also deadly. The weather can change in minutes. A clear morning can become a blizzard by afternoon. Tornadoes appear with little warning, destroying everything in their path. Flash floods wash away entire camps. Drought turns the land to dust. The environment is actively trying to kill you. If you're in a town, you might think civilization offers protection. It doesn't. Towns in the 1,870 seconds are disease factories. Without proper sewage systems or understanding of germs, illnesses spread like wildfire. Cholera can kill half a town in weeks. Typhoid, smallpox, diphtheria, tuberculosis. These diseases are constant threats walking down the main street. You notice it's not paved, it's dirt. When it rains, it becomes a mud pit so deep you can sink to your knees. When it's dry, dust rises in choking clouds with every footstep, and everywhere there's horse manure. Horses are the main transportation, and they produce tremendous amounts of waste. No one cleans it up. It just accumulates. The smell is overwhelming. Rotting garbage, animal waste, unwashed humans. Flies swarm everywhere, landing on food, on faces, spreading disease from filth to mouth. This is how cholera spreads. This is how typhoid kills. But people don't understand germ theory yet. They just know that sometimes entire families die within days. You pass the saloon. It looks nothing like the movies. No swinging doors. No piano player. Just a rough wooden building with a plank bar and cheap furniture. The liquor served isn't aged whiskey. It's raw alcohol, sometimes mixed with tobacco juice, pepper, or even gunpowder to give it flavor. A single drink could blind you if you're unlucky. Saloons are also centers of violence, not because of dramatic gunfights, but because drunk men with weapons make bad decisions. Arguments over cards, over women, over imagined slights. These escalate quickly in a society where everyone is armed and there's minimal law enforcement. Speaking of weapons, you notice everyone carries something. A gun, a knife, something. But not for the reasons you think. Weapons are primarily tools for hunting, for protection from wildlife, bears, wolves, mountain lions. These predators are real threats, especially when traveling between settlements. What surprises you is that many towns actually have strict gun control. Places like Dodge City and Tombstone require visitors to surrender their firearms when entering town. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral started because some cowboys refused to follow Tombstone's weapons ordinance. The Hollywood image of gunslingers facing off at high noon, almost entirely fiction. Real frontier violence is sudden, messy, and usually involves ambush or robbery. There's no honor, no fair fight, just death, quick and brutal. You pass the doctor's office. The sign makes you nervous because you know what frontier medicine entails. Most doctors have minimal training. Some learned through brief apprenticeships. Others attended a few months of medical school. Their knowledge is based on theories that have more in common with medieval medicine than modern science. Surgery is performed without anesthesia beyond whiskey or morphine. Sterilization is virtually unknown. Infections kill most surgical patients. Simple cuts can become deadly if they get infected. Broken bones often heal wrong, leaving people with chronic pain and disability. For women, childbirth is terrifying. Maternal mortality rates are staggering. 1 in 4 women might die in childbirth in remote areas. No prenatal care, no understanding of what's happening inside the body. When complications arise, there's often nothing anyone can do except pray. Your stomach growls again. Time for lunch. You head to a restaurant, which is just someone's home where they serve food for money. The menu is limited. Meat, probably tough and possibly spoiled despite heavy salting. Vegetables, if available, are cooked to mush. Food safety doesn't exist. Food poisoning and dysentery are common. While eating, you overhear conversations about Indian attacks. The reality is complicated. Yes, there's violence between settlers and Native Americans, but settlers and the US military are usually the aggressors. The systematic destruction of Native American nations is deliberate policy, designed to clear land for white settlement. The buffalo are being exterminated specifically to destroy the Plains Indians' way of life. Kill the buffalo, and you force the tribes onto reservations. It's cultural genocide disguised as progress. You also hear about outlaws. These are a real threat, particularly in remote areas. Law enforcement is sparse. A single sheriff might be responsible for thousands of square miles. Justice is often handled by vigilante mobs who hang suspected criminals without trial. If you're accused of horse theft, you might be dead by sunset, regardless of whether you're actually guilty. After lunch, you visit the general store. The prices shock you. Basic necessities cost enormous amounts because everything has to be transported hundreds of miles. A can of peaches might cost the equivalent of $20 in today's money. Most people spend almost all their income just on survival. The store also reminds you of the isolation. Mail is infrequent and unreliable. Newspapers are weeks out of date. You might go years without news from family back east. Many people never see their relatives again after moving west. The psychological toll of this isolation contributes to high rates of depression, alcoholism, and suicide. Dark clouds gather on the horizon. Weather on the frontier isn't just uncomfortable, it's lethal. Without forecasting, storms arrive with no warning. Blizzards strand travelers, leading to freezing deaths. Tornadoes destroy communities with no emergency services to help survivors. Flash floods wash away wagon trains. Drought ruins crops and causes starvation. You hurry back to your cabin before the storm hits. On the way, you pass miners heading to work. Mining is one of the deadliest professions. Cave-ins crush workers. Toxic gases suffocate them. Explosions from blasting powder tear bodies apart. Even if you avoid immediate death, long-term exposure to rock dust causes lung disease that slowly suffocates you over years. The rain starts just as you reach your cabin. The roof leaks in multiple places. You set out buckets to catch the water. At least this gives you drinking water. Clean water is scarce. Most people drink from sources also used for washing and watering animals. Waterborne diseases kill thousands. Sitting in your leaky cabin, you reflect on how different reality is from Hollywood's Wild West. There are no heroes. Just people struggling to survive impossible conditions. The fact that anyone makes it is a testament to human resilience. Night falls early because there's no electricity. Candles and oil lamps provide minimal light. You're careful with them because fire is a constant danger. A single spark can destroy everything. Many towns burn down multiple times in their history. You prepare for bed, exhausted after just one day. Your muscles ache. Your stomach is unsettled from unfamiliar food. Your mind is overwhelmed by the constant vigilance required just to stay alive. As you drift towards sleep, you wonder if you'll survive tomorrow. The wind howls outside, reminding you how small and vulnerable humans are against nature's vastness in the Wild West. Survival isn't guaranteed. It's earned, day by day, through hardship most modern people can't imagine. Morning light filters through the cracks in your cabin walls. You didn't sleep well. The bedbugs kept you awake, biting incessantly. Your body aches even more than yesterday. But there's no time to rest. The Wild West waits for no one. Today, let's say you decide to travel. Maybe you need to go to another town. Maybe you're joining a wagon train heading further west. Either way, travel in 1875 is nothing like what you're used to. If you're lucky, you own a horse. This is a big if. Horses are expensive. A good horse might cost several months' wages. Then you need a saddle, bridles, feed, and care. Many people can't afford horses and have to walk everywhere. Even if you have a horse, riding isn't pleasant. Saddles in the 1,870 seconds aren't designed for comfort. They're designed for function. After a few hours in the saddle, your rear end is covered in blisters. Your legs ache from gripping the horse. Your back hurts from the constant jolting, and horses spook easily. A snake in the grass, a sudden noise. Anything can make your horse bolt, throwing you off. Broken bones are common, and miles from help, a broken leg can be a death sentence. If you can't afford a horse, maybe you have a wagon. But wagon travel is brutally uncomfortable. The wagons have no suspension. You feel every rock, every rut, every hole in the trail. The constant jarring makes you nauseous. It's like being on a boat, except the sea is made of dirt and rocks. Roads barely exist. Usually, they're just tracks carved by previous travelers. After rain, they become mud pits where wagons sink axle deep. During dry periods, dust is so thick you can barely breathe. You tie a cloth over your face, but dust still gets everywhere. In your nose, your mouth, your eyes. Wagons break down constantly. Wheels crack, axles snap, and when your wagon breaks down in the middle of nowhere, you have to fix it yourself. No triple, no tow trucks, just you, your tools, and your knowledge. If you can't fix it, you might have to abandon it and walk. Let's say you're really ambitious. You've decided to join a wagon train heading to California or Oregon. This journey is one of the most dangerous undertakings of the 19th century. Of the roughly 400,000 people who attempted the Oregon Trail, about 1 in 10 didn't survive. The Oregon Trail is sometimes called America's longest graveyard. Historians estimate about 10 to 15 deaths for every mile of the 2,000-mile trail. Think about that. A grave every 350 feet for 2,000 miles. The trail is literally lined with markers and crosses, many without names. Disease is the #1 killer. Cholera is particularly devastating. This bacterial infection spreads through contaminated water. It causes such severe diarrhea and vomiting that a person can be healthy at breakfast and dead by dinner. There's no effective treatment. Wagon trains sometimes lose dozens of people in a single outbreak. Other diseases kill too. Dysentery, typhoid, mountain fever. Children are especially vulnerable. Many families bury multiple children during the journey. Medical care is limited to folk remedies that rarely help and sometimes make things worse. Crossing rivers is another deadly challenge. Wagons aren't boats, but you have to cross rivers to reach the West. Some have ferries, others have fords, but many require floating your wagon across like a makeshift raft. Wagons frequently capsize, drowning people and animals, destroying precious supplies. The Platte River, the Columbia River, the Snake River, all of these claim hundreds of lives during the migration years. Bodies wash downstream, sometimes never recovered. Families mourn briefly, then continue. There's no time for extended grief. Every day's delay means less chance of crossing the mountains before winter snows make passes impossible. Contrary to movies, Native American attacks are relatively rare. Most tribes actually help migrants, offering supplies, guidance, assistance with crossings. The majority of violent deaths on the trail come from accidents, being crushed by wagon wheels, drowning, being kicked by animals. Firearms accidents are shockingly common. Most travelers are inexperienced with guns, but carry them anyway. Accidental shootings happen frequently. A gun drops from a wagon and fires. Someone cleaning a gun doesn't check if it's loaded. Children find weapons and play with them. Each mistake is potentially fatal. The psychological toll is immense. You bury family members along the trail. then immediately continue traveling. There's no time to process grief. The constant stress, combined with physical exhaustion and inadequate nutrition, causes mental breakdowns. Suicide is not uncommon among trail migrants. If you survive the journey to California or Oregon, your challenges aren't over. Many arrive having spent everything on the journey itself. Families reach their destination destitute, malnourished, ill. The promised land has its own harsh realities, but maybe you're not traveling that far. Maybe just to a nearby settlement. Even short journeys present dangers. Outlaws prey on lone travelers. While stagecoach robberies are exaggerated in fiction, they happen regularly enough to be a real concern. The environment itself is dangerous. Flash floods can appear from nowhere, washing away trails and trapping travelers. Summer heat in desert regions kills through dehydration. Winter blizzards trap people, leading to freezing deaths or desperate situations like the Donner Party, where survivors resorted to cannibalism. Navigation is challenging without detailed maps. You rely on vague directions, landmarks that might change or be misidentified, and guides who sometimes prove unreliable. Getting lost can be a death sentence, especially if supplies run low. As you travel today, you notice something. Movies rarely show accurately the diversity of people. The Wild West isn't populated only by white cowboys. It's a meeting ground of cultures from around the world. Chinese immigrants work as railroad builders. Miners, merchants, they face brutal discrimination, often forced into the most dangerous jobs for lower pay than white workers. Mexican families have lived in the Southwest for generations, long before it became U.S. territory. Black cowboys make up about 25% of the workforce on some ranches, though they face discrimination everywhere. European immigrants from Germany, Ireland, Italy, Scandinavia bring their own cultures. And of course, dozens of Native American nations have called these lands home for thousands of years before others arrived. This diversity doesn't mean equality. Racial violence is common. Chinese railroad workers are often given the most dangerous assignments, like handling explosives to blast through mountains. Mexican landowners frequently see their property seized through legal manipulation after the Mexican-American War. Black Americans move west hoping to escape Southern discrimination, but find frontier racism just as entrenched. Despite their crucial contributions to ranching and building communities, they're frequently excluded from economic opportunities and social acceptance. For Native Americans, westward expansion is catastrophic. The indigenous population, once perhaps 15 million, has been reduced to fewer than 300. 000 by 1900. Disease, warfare, forced relocation, and deliberate destruction of food sources, particularly buffalo, decimate numerous tribes. U.S. government policy systematically pushes Native Americans onto reservations, often in areas with poor soil and few resources. Treaties are broken whenever valuable resources are discovered on reservation land. Native children are taken from families and sent to boarding schools designed to kill the Indian. Save the man. The romanticized cowboys versus Indians narrative grossly misrepresents complex interactions. Many native nations initially try to accommodate newcomers. Violence typically erupts after treaty violations, land encroachment, or deliberate provocations. As you continue traveling, you think about another group, rarely portrayed accurately: women. Far from helpless damsels, Frontier women perform incredibly demanding labor while navigating restrictive social expectations. On homesteads, women not only handle traditional domestic duties, cooking, cleaning, childcare, making clothing, but also work in fields, tend livestock, defend the home when necessary. Their workday starts before dawn and ends well after dark with few days of rest. A frontier woman might plow fields in the morning, deliver a neighbor's baby at midday, fight off predators threatening livestock in the afternoon, and still prepare meals and care for children throughout. Many become widows young due to dangerous frontier conditions and must manage farms or businesses alone while raising children. Despite essential contributions, women have few legal rights. They can't vote, can't own property if married, don't have custody of children in divorce. Domestic violence is considered a private matter with little legal recourse. For unmarried women, options are limited. Teaching is one respectable profession, though female teachers are paid significantly less than men and expected to resign upon marriage. Some find independence running boarding houses, working as nurses, or establishing dressmaking businesses. Then there are prostitutes who work in frontier brothels, while later mythology romanticizes these women. Reality is grim. Many enter the profession from economic desperation after being widowed or abandoned. Physical abuse, drug addiction, and venereal disease are common hazards. Even successful prostitutes find themselves socially ostracized and unable to transition to respectable positions. Some women do find greater freedom on the frontier. The shortage of women gives them more marriage options and sometimes better treatment as communities compete to attract female residents. A few territories like Wyoming grant women voting rights decades before the 19th Amendment. As day wears on, you wonder about law enforcement in this supposedly lawless land. Reality is complex and varies by location. Major towns typically have some law enforcement, but vast rural areas have minimal protection. County sheriffs are elected officials responsible for enormous territories. A single sheriff might be the only law enforcement for thousands of square miles. They rely heavily on deputizing ordinary citizens during emergencies, creating posses to pursue criminals. Town marshals handle law enforcement within town limits. These positions are dangerous and poorly paid, attracting a mix of dedicated public servants and those who enjoy the power. Some famous lawmen like Wyatt Earp move between legitimate law enforcement and questionable enterprises throughout their careers. Federal marshals have jurisdiction throughout territories and states, but are few in number. They focus on major crimes like counterfeiting or mail robbery. The legendary U.S. Marshals of Western movies, single-handedly bringing law to lawless towns, are largely fictional. In remote areas, justice is handled through informal community action. Vigilante groups form to address threats when formal law enforcement is absent. Sometimes these groups maintain basic order. Sometimes they become vehicles for prejudice, personal vendettas, or mob violence. The iconic quick-draw gunfight is mostly later invention. Most frontier violence is mundane and impulsive. Bar fights that escalate, domestic violence, disputes over land or livestock. These are far more common than dramatic shootouts. Criminal punishment is harsh. Hanging is standard for murder. Rape, sometimes theft. Prisons exist but are primitive with high mortality rates. Many communities prefer immediate execution to the expense of long-term imprisonment. As evening approaches, you seek shelter. If lucky, you find a hotel. Don't expect luxury. A typical room has a simple bed, probably infested with bed bugs, a washstand with pitcher and basin, maybe a chair. Bathroom facilities are an outhouse out back, shared by all guests. Privacy is minimal with thin walls. You hear everything your neighbors do and say. In busy establishments, you might share a bed with a stranger. Common practice to maximize capacity. Sheets might not be changed between guests. Lighting is limited to candles or oil lamps. A night's lodging costs 25 cents to $1. Significant expense for average workers. Many sleep in stables or under stars to save money despite additional risks. If traveling through remote areas, you camp. Build a fire if you can find fuel. Prepare a meal from limited supplies. Sleep on the ground with minimal protection from elements or wildlife. Proper fire management is literally life or death. Too large, and you might spark a prairie fire consuming thousands of acres. Too small, and you might freeze during cold nights. Camp cooking requires skills most modern people lack, often resulting in burnt yet raw meals. Night falls completely. The sounds of frontier darkness surround you. Coyotes howl. Unfamiliar birds call. Wind whispers through grass. For people accustomed to modern light and noise pollution, the profound darkness and strange sounds trigger intense anxiety. Many travelers sleep poorly, not just from physical discomfort, but from fear. Native attacks, though rare, often occur at dawn. Predators like wolves and bears might investigate camps. Venomous snakes and scorpions seek warm places, sometimes including bedrolls. Even without actual threats, psychological stress of constant vigilance takes its toll. Frontier diaries mention exhaustion not just from labor, but from mental strain of perpetual alertness. Modern people with locks, alarms, and dense populations would find this vulnerability profoundly disturbing. As you drift towards sleep, you reflect on the day's journey. Travel in the Wild West bears no resemblance to sanitized Hollywood portrayals. It's grueling, dangerous, uncomfortable beyond modern endurance. Skills required: navigation, emergency repairs, safe firearm handling. Take years to develop. Mistakes are often fatal. The darkness deepens. Sounds of night creatures grow louder. Tomorrow brings new challenges. If you survive the night, perhaps you'll reach your destination, or perhaps you'll become another unmarked grave along the trail. The Wild West forgives no weakness and offers no second chances. Every day survived is victory against overwhelming odds. A new day dawns. Somehow, you've survived the night. This is an achievement in itself. As you stretch your aching muscles and rub sleep from your eyes, you contemplate what direction your frontier experience might take today. Perhaps you'll try your luck in one of the booming mining towns. You've heard stories of the California gold rush, Nevada silver strikes, Colorado mining booms, tales of ordinary men finding nuggets the size of chicken eggs and becoming wealthy overnight have drawn hundreds of thousands west. What these stories don't mention are the brutal realities awaiting those who chase mineral dreams. Let's say you decide to try mining. What would that actually entail? First, you need to stake a claim. This means finding unclaimed land with potential mineral deposits, increasingly difficult by the 1,870 as the easiest and richest areas were claimed years earlier. If you find a promising spot, you must register your claim at the nearest government office and pay required fees. which can be substantial. Then the real work begins. For placer mining, searching for loose gold in streams, you spend hours bent over in ice-cold mountain water, sifting through sediment with a pan or sluice box. Your hands crack and bleed from constant exposure to water and rough materials. Your back aches from the hunched position. After all that effort, you might find a few tiny gold flakes worth pennies. Hard rock mining, digging for veins of ore in mountains, multiplies dangers exponentially. Tunneling into unstable rock without modern safety equipment leads to frequent cave-ins that crush miners. Poorly ventilated shafts fill with toxic gases like carbon monoxide, odorless but deadly, suffocating miners without warning. Blasting with black powder or dynamite to break through rock is incredibly hazardous. Miners frequently lose fingers, hands, eyes, or lives when charges detonate prematurely or rock fragments become deadly projectiles. The constant noise and percussion leave many with permanent hearing loss, even avoiding immediate catastrophes. Long-term health effects are devastating. Miners constantly inhale fine rock dust, leading to silicosis, a painful lung disease that slowly suffocates its victims. Mercury used in gold processing causes neurological damage, tremors, mental deterioration. Those working copper or lead mines absorb toxic metals, causing chronic illness and early death. The mining industry has virtually no safety regulations. Mine owners prioritize profit over worker welfare. Injuries are expected parts of the job. Medical care for injured miners is minimal and often ineffective. Serious injury typically means the end of a career with no disability support or workers' compensation. For all these risks and hardships, what's the likely reward? Despite mythology of lucky prospectors, the vast majority of miners barely earn subsistence wages. By the 1,870 seconds, most work for large companies rather than independently, earning $2 to $3 for grueling 10 to 12-hour days. Studies suggest storekeepers, saloon owners, and prostitutes consistently make more money than miners whose dreams sustain frontier mining towns. Mining towns themselves are notoriously rough. Imagine a community of primarily young, single men engaged in dangerous work. Few women, families, or civilizing institutions. Alcohol consumption is astronomical. Violence is commonplace. Fights, stabbings, shootings occur regularly. Sanitation in mining camps is abysmal, with minimal planning or infrastructure. Human waste and garbage accumulate in streets and waterways. Typhoid, cholera, dysentery spread rapidly. During warm months, stench is overwhelming and flies spread disease from waste to food. If you find valuable ore, you face challenges converting it to cash. Banking in the Wild West is primitive and often predatory. Many mining towns have no banks, forcing miners to carry gold dust or ore, making them targets for theft. Some saloons and stores buy gold, but frequently at rates far below actual value, taking advantage of miners' limited options. Where banks exist, they operate with minimal regulation. Bank failures are common, wiping out customers' life savings without warning. Many bankers are little more than con men who establish storefronts, collect deposits, and disappear overnight with all funds. Without federally backed currency, paper money issued by individual banks fluctuates wildly in value. Counterfeit bills circulate widely. Perhaps after considering mining dangers, you decide to try ranching. The cattle industry is booming in the 1,870 seconds, with demand for beef in eastern cities creating opportunities. Surely this would be healthier, more profitable. Ranching avoids some worst health hazards of mining but introduces unique dangers. Starting a ranch requires significant capital: land, livestock, equipment. Buildings all represent major investments. Many aspiring ranchers go deeply into debt. Nature often has other plans. Droughts wither grazing lands and dry up water sources, forcing ranchers to watch cattle starve or sell at devastating losses. Harsh winters can kill entire herds, as happened in the Great Die-Up of 1886 to 1887, when up to 90% of cattle on northern ranges froze or starved during unusually severe weather. Disease can sweep through herds, wiping out investments overnight. Texas fever, anthrax, other infectious diseases have no effective treatments. Predators like wolves and cougars take constant tolls on livestock. Poisonous plants, quicksand, and injuries further reduce herds. Cattle drives, moving herds hundreds of miles to railroad shipping points, aren't romantic adventures, but grueling, dangerous undertakings. Cowboys work 20-hour days during drives, catching brief naps in saddles as they move thousands of animals across difficult terrain. River crossings can turn deadly if animals panic, creating pile-ups that drown cattle and cowboys. Stampedes, triggered by something as simple as lightning or a snapping twig, turn thousands of one. 500-pound animals into an unstoppable destructive force. Cowboys caught in stampedes are often trampled to death. The cowboy's life is far from Hollywood portrayals. They typically earn about $30 per month for exhausting, dangerous work. Most are very young men, often teenagers from poor backgrounds with few options. A significant percentage are black, Mexican, or mixed race facing discrimination, limiting opportunities elsewhere. Their diet on the trail consists mainly of beans, salt, pork, and biscuits with minimal fresh food. Medical care is limited to whatever the trail cook knows about folk remedies. Injuries common in dangerous work often go untreated until life-threatening. Many cowboys die young from injuries, exposure, or violence. Perhaps ranching doesn't appeal. What about farming? The Homestead Act of 1862 opened vast areas of the West to settlement, offering 160 acres free to anyone who would live on and improve land for 5 years. This seems like an incredible opportunity. Reality proves far more challenging. First, 160 acres might sound substantial, but in arid regions comprising much of available land, it's often insufficient to support a family. Traditional Eastern farming methods fail in environments where rainfall is a fraction of what pioneers expected. Starting a frontier farm requires tremendous physical labor. First task is building shelter, typically a sod house on treeless plains, constructed by cutting and stacking dense prairie turf. These sodis are dark, damp dwellings that leak when it rains, harbor insects and snakes, and crumble without constant maintenance. Then comes back-breaking work of breaking the land for planting. Prairie sod, held together by dense grass roots developed over centuries, is extraordinarily difficult to plow. It can take a year or more just to prepare a few acres for planting. The work is so physically demanding, it permanently damages many farmers' bodies. Once crops are planted, farmers face threats from every direction. Drought withers plants before harvest. Torrential rains wash away seedlings or flood fields. Early frost kills crops just before harvest. Grasshoppers descend in biblical swarms, consuming everything green and sometimes even eating tool handles left in fields. Disease affects frontier farmers with particularly devastating consequences. With no hired help and little community support, family illness during crucial planting or harvesting periods can mean difference between survival and starvation. Women often continue working fields while heavily pregnant or days after giving birth, risking health because work simply can't wait. Farm accidents are common and often fatal. Homemade tools break and cause injuries. Animals panic and trample handlers. Even successful harvests can turn deadly. Numerous farmers die when they fall into grain storage bins and suffocate, or when poorly constructed buildings collapse under weight of contents. Isolation of frontier farms takes heavy psychological toll. Neighbors might be miles away, visited only occasionally. Women particularly suffer from this isolation, some going months without speaking to anyone outside immediate family. Depression, anxiety, and prairie madness affect many settlers, sometimes leading to abandonment of homesteads or suicide. For those who persevere and actually produce crops, economic obstacles remain. Transportation to markets is difficult and expensive. Without refrigeration, perishable products must be sold quickly or preserved. Large agricultural corporations and railroad companies keep crop prices low and transportation costs high, squeezing independent farmers from both directions. By the 1872nd, another option emerges: working for wages in growing towns and industries. Perhaps this offers safer, more stable path than high-risk ventures of mining, ranching, or farming. Wage labor avoids some worst physical dangers and financial risks, but introduces its own hardships. Industrial safety standards are virtually non-existent. Workers in factories, mills, and workshops suffer horrific injuries from unguarded machinery. Construction workers build increasingly tall structures without harnesses or safety equipment, leading to frequent fatal falls. Railroad work is particularly dangerous. Track layers work with minimal equipment under brutal conditions, suffering high rates of injury and death from accidents, heat stroke, exhaustion. Chinese workers who build much of the transcontinental railroad are often assigned most dangerous tasks like handling unstable explosives. Working hours are long, typically 10 to 12 hours daily. 6 days weekly, pays low, with most workers barely earning subsistence wages. Child labor is common, with children as young as 8 or 9 working alongside adults, often suffering higher injury rates due to size and inexperience. Workers have essentially no legal protections. Employers can fire people without cause, reduce wages arbitrarily, or withhold pay entirely. Those who complain or attempt to organize face blacklisting, being marked as troublemakers. No other employer will hire. Company towns, settlements where a single employer owns all housing and businesses, are common in mining and lumber regions. Workers pay inflated prices at company stores, live in company housing, and sometimes receive script, company currency, rather than legal tender. This creates debt bondage where workers can never save enough to escape. Whether you mine, ranch, farm, or work for wages. Frontier life shapes your experience in ways modern people find disorienting. Perhaps most striking is the relationship with time. Not carefully measured minutes and hours of our digital age, but fluid reality governed by daylight, seasons, and natural rhythms, without electric lighting. Most people wake at dawn and sleep shortly after sunset. Active hours expand and contract with seasons. Work isn't measured in 8-hour shifts, but by tasks needing completion. During harvest or roundup, people might work from first light until well after dark for weeks without break. During winter, many rural workers have periods of relative inactivity. The concept of punctuality has limited relevance. With few clocks and limited need for precise timing in most activities, people operate on approximate schedules. Morning or after dinner are sufficiently specific for most purposes. Entertainment looks nothing like modern counterparts. After exhausting workdays, most have little energy for complex activities. Conversation around fires, storytelling, simple card games are common evening pastimes. Music is popular when instruments and skilled players are available. Reading material is precious and often shared among entire communities. A single book might be read aloud to gatherings or passed from family to family until it falls apart. Newspapers, when available, are read repeatedly, with every advertisement scrutinized for information about the wider world. Organized sports exist in simpler forms. Baseball gains popularity, played with minimal equipment on makeshift fields. Horse racing, wrestling, shooting competitions provide entertainment and opportunities to demonstrate valuable skills. Children play games requiring little equipment, tag, hide and seek, variations of stickball with found objects. Holidays and community celebrations take on great importance as rare opportunities for socializing. 4th of July celebrations might draw people from miles around. Harvest festivals mark successful completion of the year's most critical work. As day draws to close, you reflect on relentless challenges of frontier life. Every aspect requires harder work, involves greater risk, offers fewer comforts than modern equivalents. People who survived possessed qualities modern society rarely demands: extraordinary physical endurance, practical skills applicable to countless emergencies, psychological resilience in face of constant hardship and loss. Darkness gathers once more. With it comes silence profound enough to hear your own heartbeat. No car engines, no air conditioners, no electronic hums, just whisper of wind, chorus of insects, occasional call of night birds. This profound quiet, so alien to modern ears, is the soundtrack of frontier nights. As you drift towards sleep, you wonder if you would have had what it took to survive here, not just for a day or week, but for years and decades. The people who shaped the American West were not idealized heroes, but complex individuals facing extraordinary challenges with limited resources and knowledge of their time. Their story, stripped of romanticism, is one of human endurance against conditions that would break many today. Morning arrives again in the Wild West, bringing with it hunger. Your constant companion on the frontier, food in the 1,870 seconds. West bears little resemblance to the varied, convenient diet you're accustomed to in the modern world. The good news is game is still relatively plentiful in many areas. Deer, elk, rabbit, various birds can supplement your diet if you have skills to hunt them. The bad news: hunting requires ammunition, expensive and might be needed for protection. It also demands time away from other essential work, making it a luxury many settlers can't afford during busy seasons. Most frontier families rely heavily on foods they can grow, preserve, or purchase in bulk. The staples are beans, corn, and pork, dense in calories but monotonous and nutrition incomplete. Fresh fruits and vegetables are available only in season, a few months at most. Winter diets often contain no fresh produce whatsoever. This lack of dietary variety leads to widespread nutritional deficiencies, scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, is common during winter and early spring when no fresh produce is available. The symptoms: bleeding gums, loosening teeth, joint pain, eventually death, are well known but difficult to prevent with available resources. Food preservation is a constant challenge and critical survival skill. Without refrigeration, meat needs to be consumed quickly or preserved through smoking, salting, or drying. These methods deter bacterial growth but drastically change flavors and textures while reducing nutritional value. The heavy salt content of preserved foods contributes to high blood pressure and other health issues. Women spend enormous amounts of time preserving food when abundant for use during scarce periods. Vegetables are pickled in vinegar or fermented. Fruits are dried or preserved with sugar if available. Root vegetables might be stored in root cellars, underground spaces maintaining cool temperatures. These preservation efforts aren't optional activities, but essential survival work determining whether families eat during winter. Food storage presents its own problems. Properly prepared preserved foods can last months or years, but improper techniques lead to spoilage and potentially deadly food poisoning. Additionally, stored food attracts pests, rats, mice, and insects consume portions of most stored supplies, and their droppings contaminate what remains. Most frontier families simply accept a certain amount of insect parts and rodent droppings in their flour, beans, and other staples as unavoidable. Cooking itself is far more labor-intensive than modern people comprehend. Meals are prepared over open hearths or wood-burning stoves, requiring constant attention and fuel. In wood-scarce prairie regions, women and children might spend hours gathering buffalo chips, dried manure, or twisted grass to burn as cooking fuel. Water has to be hauled from wells or streams, often hundreds of pounds per day, for cooking, cleaning, and drinking. Even with these efforts, meals lack variety and flavor profiles. Modern people expect spices are expensive luxuries, used sparingly if at all. Sugar and coffee are treasured items, often hoarded for special occasions. Fresh milk is available only if a family keeps a cow, and only part of the year when the cow is producing. Most frontier children grow up with simple, repetitive diets that would horrify modern nutritionists. Interestingly, despite these limitations, obesity is rare on the frontier. The combination of limited food supplies, minimal sugar consumption, and constant physical labor keeps most people lean. However, this leanness isn't necessarily healthy. Many suffer from malnutrition even when they have sufficient calories to sustain work, beyond basic survival needs like food. Frontier life presents unique challenges for families raising children. If you had been born in the Wild West rather than just visiting, your childhood would have been dramatically different from modern experiences. Childhood itself was conceived differently in the 19th century. Children as young as 6 or 7 were expected to contribute meaningful work to family survival, not as educational chores, but as essential economic contributions. Young children minded livestock, gathered eggs, picked vegetables, watched younger siblings, and helped with countless tasks that freed adults for heavier work. By age 10 or 12, most frontier children worked alongside adults at nearly adult capacity. Boys followed fathers into fields, barns, or workshops, learning skills through direct participation rather than formal instruction. Girls worked with mothers, learning complex domestic skills necessary for frontier homemaking, producing essential goods like clothing, preserved food, candles, and soap. This early adulthood extended to other areas of life. Children weren't sheltered from harsh realities around them. They witnessed births, deaths, slaughtering of animals, and sometimes violent conflicts of frontier communities. They were expected to understand and adapt rather than being protected. Education, as modern people understand it, was limited and inconsistent. In established towns, schools might operate a few months each year. Typically during winter, when agricultural work was minimal, one teacher, often barely educated themselves, might be responsible for students ranging from 5 to 17 years old, all studying in a single room. Physical conditions in these schools were challenging. Buildings were poorly insulated, leading to freezing conditions in winter and stifling heat in warmer months. Supplies were minimal, a few shared textbooks, slates for writing that had to be constantly erased and reused, and minimal paper treated as precious resource. Corporal punishment was standard disciplinary approach, with whipping or beatings administered for infractions as minor as whispering or failing to memorize assigned material. In more remote areas, formal schooling might not exist at all. Some families conducted home education using whatever books were available, but many frontier children received only the most basic literacy and calculation skills. If that, their education focused instead on practical knowledge, how to predict weather, track animals, prepare soil for planting, treat common injuries, and perform countless tasks essential for survival. Child mortality remained devastatingly high throughout the frontier period. Approximately 1 in 4 children died before reaching adulthood, with highest risk in the first 5 years of life. Diseases modern medicine easily prevents or treats: measles, diphtheria, scarlet fever, whooping cough, routinely killed or permanently disabled young children. Accidents claimed many more, as child safety was a foreign concept in an era where survival demanded risk-taking. The psychological impact of this mortality on both children and parents is difficult for modern people to comprehend. Most children grew up watching siblings die. Parents expected to lose children and often gave the same name to a subsequent child if an older sibling died young. A practice that seems strange today but reflected different relationship with mortality when death was an everyday presence. Perhaps nothing illustrates the gulf between frontier and modern life more clearly than approaches to health and medicine. If you became ill or injured in the 1,870 seconds west, your experience would bear almost no resemblance to modern healthcare. The first difference would be absence of professional medical care in most situations. Doctors were scarce, with many communities having none at all. Those who did practice often had minimal training, perhaps a brief apprenticeship or a few months at a medical college. Their knowledge reflected medical science of the era, which still relied heavily on theories like humoral balance, having more in common with medieval medicine than modern practice. Without access to professional care, most health issues were addressed through home remedies and folk medicine. Every community had people, usually women, known for healing skills, drawing on traditions brought from various cultures. Some of these treatments, particularly herbal remedies, had genuine medicinal properties, but many were ineffective or actively harmful. Common medical treatments included bloodletting, which weakened already ill patients, purgatives causing severe diarrhea, supposedly to expel bad humors, and poultices of various substances applied to wounds, some of which introduced infection rather than preventing it. Laudanum, a tincture of opium, was widely used for pain, leading to addiction in many cases. Mercury compounds were prescribed for numerous conditions despite toxicity. Even when treatments had some validity, impure medications caused problems. Without pharmaceutical regulations or standardization, commercially sold medicines varied wildly in potency and often contained dangerous contaminants. Many patent medicines marketed as cure-alls contained primarily alcohol, providing temporary relief through intoxication rather than addressing underlying condition. Surgery in frontier conditions was particularly horrific, without effective anesthesia beyond alcohol, whiskey, or opium. Patients endured excruciating pain during procedures. Sterilization was unknown or inconsistently practiced, leading to rampant post-surgical infections. Amputation was standard treatment for serious limb injuries, performed with saws and knives that might be wiped clean but never properly sterilized. Childbirth represented perhaps the starkest contrast between frontier and modern medical experiences. Women typically gave birth at home, attended by a midwife if one was available, or female relatives if not, without prenatal care. Many complications weren't identified until labor was underway. Breech births, hemorrhage, and other emergencies that modern medicine handles routinely often resulted in death of mother, child, or both. Maternal mortality rates on the frontier were approximately 1 death per 100 births, more than 100 times higher than in developed countries today. Many women approached each pregnancy knowing it might be their last experience in life. Men's diaries and letters from the period frequently mention the heartbreaking reality of raising children alone after losing wives in childbirth. The combined impact of inadequate nutrition, constant physical strain, minimal preventive care, and primitive treatment options meant frontier populations experienced health outcomes more similar to developing nations today than to modern America. Life expectancy at birth was under 40 years, with those surviving childhood likely to suffer chronic health problems by their 52nds if they lived that long. Beyond these material hardships, frontier life imposed a form of isolation and disconnection that modern people accustomed to instant global communication would find almost unbearable. This isolation shaped frontier psychology and culture in profound ways. Communication with distant family or friends occurred at the speed of physical transportation. Letters took weeks or months to reach recipients, if they arrived at all. News traveled slowly and unreliably, often distorted through retelling. Major events might not become known in remote areas until months after they occurred. This information vacuum contributed to a highly localized worldview where distant events seemed abstract and irrelevant compared to immediate community concerns. The isolation was particularly difficult for those accustomed to more settled environment. Women who had grown up with close female friendships and family networks often found themselves alone for days or weeks while husbands traveled for supplies or work. Their diaries frequently mention crippling loneliness and psychological strain of having no adult conversation for extended periods. This isolation sometimes led to what contemporary accounts called prairie madness, severe depression, anxiety, and occasionally psychosis triggered by a combination of isolation, constant work, and environmental hardships. Some affected individuals became violent toward family members or committed suicide. Others simply abandoned homesteads and returned east, unable to endure psychological pressure. Even in established communities, social connections were limited by practical constraints. Visiting neighbors might require traveling several miles each way, a significant undertaking when time was precious and transportation limited to walking or horseback. Formal social gatherings were infrequent, typically centered around church services, seasonal celebrations, or community work events like barn raisings. Churches played crucial roles in frontier communities beyond spiritual function. They served as social hubs, educational centers, and mutual aid societies. Even those with limited religious conviction often participated in church activities for community connection they provided. Religious leaders frequently took on roles far beyond religious guidance, serving as teachers, dispute mediators, and community organizers. The establishment of community institutions marked important milestones in frontier development. Building a school, church, or meeting hall represented commitment to permanent settlement rather than temporary exploitation. These institutions helped transform mining camps or trading posts into towns with collective identities and shared futures. Frontier communities also developed distinctive forms of mutual aid and collective action necessary for survival in harsh conditions. Barn raisings and house raisings allowed families to complete large construction projects impossible for individual households. Harvest teams moved from farm to farm, ensuring crops were gathered before weather could destroy them. These cooperative traditions reflected practical reality that no individual or family could survive the frontier entirely through self-reliance. This community interdependence existed alongside individualism that later became mythologized in frontier narratives. Both elements were necessary responses to frontier conditions: self-reliance for daily survival, community cooperation for challenges beyond individual capacity. As another day in the Wild West draws to close, you contemplate mental and emotional resilience required to endure such conditions year after year. The people who populated the American frontier weren't superhuman. They suffered, struggled, and sometimes broke under relentless pressure of their environment. But many adapted and persevered, developing skills and perspectives that allowed them to find meaning and even joy amid hardship. The darkness settles around you once more, bringing profound silence of the pre-industrial night. The day's experiences have given you a glimpse into a world both familiar and utterly alien. A world where survival required constant vigilance, where comfort was rare and luxury almost non-existent, where death was an everyday companion rather than a distant stranger. As sleep approaches, you wonder about the people who chose this life or had it thrust upon them by circumstance. What drove them west? What sustained them through blizzards, droughts, illness, and loss? What would they think of the world their struggles helped create? The questions follow you into dreams filled with endless prairies, towering mountains, and faces of those who tamed the Wild West, not through romantic gunfights, but through quiet heroism of daily persistence against overwhelming odds. Dawn breaks on what could be your final day in the Wild West. As golden light spills across the landscape, you take a moment to appreciate the raw beauty that drew so many westward. Despite dangers and hardships, the frontier is a place of stunning natural grandeur. Vast prairies rippling like oceans, mountains scraping the sky, canyons plunging into Earth's depths. This beauty, at least, wasn't a Hollywood invention. But even this relationship with the natural world differed profoundly from modern environmental perspectives. The frontier mentality viewed nature primarily as a resource to be conquered and exploited rather than preserved or protected. Timber was cut without consideration for regeneration. Game was hunted to the edge of extinction in many regions. Streams were diverted, polluted, or destroyed for mining operations with no thought for downstream consequences. The near extinction of the American bison stands as perhaps the starkest example of this exploitative approach. In the 1700s, an estimated 30 to 60 million bison roamed North America. By 1884, fewer than one, 000, remained. This devastation wasn't simply a result of hunting for food or hides, though that played a part. It was also deliberate policy encouraged by the US government as a way to deprive Plains Indian tribes of their primary resource, forcing them onto reservations. General Philip Sheridan reportedly stated, "Let them kill, skin, and sell until the buffalo is exterminated. It is the only way to bring lasting peace and allow civilization to advance." Whether or not he actually spoke these exact words, they accurately reflect government policy of the era. The destruction of buffalo herds was environmental warfare designed to break indigenous resistance by eliminating their way of life. For Native American nations across the West, expansion of white settlement represented an apocalypse, not just physical displacement, but collapse of economic systems, spiritual practices, and cultural identities tied to specific landscapes and resources. While early interactions sometimes involved trade and cooperation, by the 1,872nd, most indigenous groups faced stark choices: confinement on reservations, continued resistance against overwhelming odds, or cultural assimilation. The reservation system itself represented a form of cultural genocide. Native children were forcibly removed from families and sent to boarding schools designed to kill the Indian and save the man. As Captain Richard H. Pratt, founder of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, infamously stated, these children had their hair cut short, were forbidden from speaking their languages, practicing their religions, or maintaining cultural identities. The intergenerational trauma from these policies continues to affect Native communities today. Armed resistance against American expansion almost invariably ended in defeat. Though some groups maintained independence longer than others, the Battle of the Little Bighorn in 1876, where combined Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, and Arapaho forces defeated Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer's 7th Cavalry, represented one of the last major indigenous victories. Subsequent military campaigns were marked by increasing brutality, including attacks on villages and killing of women and children. The tragedy of this cultural collision was heightened by the fact that many native nations had sophisticated agricultural systems complex governance structures, and rich cultural traditions that could have offered valuable knowledge to European settlers. Different approaches to land use and ownership created fundamental misunderstandings. Many native groups couldn't conceive of owning land any more than one could own air or stars, making treaty negotiations over territory fundamentally problematic from the start. These cultural conflicts extended beyond native-white relations. The West was extraordinarily diverse, with communities from around the world bringing different languages, religions, customs, and approaches to frontier life. This diversity was both a strength, introducing varied skills and perspectives, and a source of tension in communities struggling with scarce resources and limited infrastructure. Chinese immigrants who played crucial roles in building the Transcontinental Railroad and developing mining operations faced particularly severe discrimination. The Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the first major American law restricting immigration based on nationality, grew from anti-Chinese sentiment that had festered for decades in Western territories. Chinese miners were frequently driven from productive claims through violence or unjust application of foreign miners' taxes. Chinese communities in frontier towns often faced riots and mass expulsions when economic conditions deteriorated. Mexican Americans, many of whom had become U.S. citizens through territorial acquisition rather than immigration, similarly faced discrimination and displacement. Despite treaty guarantees protecting property rights following the Mexican-American War, many Mexican landowners saw their holdings taken through legal manipulation, intimidation, or outright fraud. Even European immigrants found that national and religious identities continued to matter. Irish Catholics, German Lutherans, Scandinavian Protestants, Eastern European Jews. Each group tended to establish distinct communities and maintained cultural practices from their homelands. These communities provided mutual support but sometimes became targets for nativist sentiment. African Americans who moved west after the Civil War hoped to find freedom from Southern oppression but often encountered different forms of discrimination. Black cowboys, who made up approximately 25% of the workforce on some cattle operations, rarely received recognition in contemporary accounts or later mythology. Black homesteaders established communities in several Western territories, but frequently faced organized resistance from white neighbors and discriminatory application of homestead laws. The collision of these diverse groups, each with their own values, practices, and expectations, created frontier communities far more complex and conflict-ridden than later romantic depictions would suggest. As the day progresses, you find yourself in a frontier town undergoing rapid transformation. A transition happening across the West during the 1870 seconds and 1880 seconds. The initial phase of settlement, characterized by individual prospectors, independent farmers, and small-scale enterprises, was giving way to more organized corporate development of Western resources. The arrival of railroads catalyzed this transition. The Transcontinental Railroad, completed in 1869, dramatically reduced travel time between East and West from months to days. Subsequent branch lines penetrated previously isolated regions, connecting them to national markets and supply chains. This transportation revolution allowed large-scale extraction of Western resources for Eastern factories and enabled mass-produced Eastern goods to flood Western markets. These economic connections accelerated integration of Western regions into national systems, but often disadvantaged small producers. Independent miners couldn't compete with large mining corporations that brought industrial methods and capital investment. Family farms struggled against agricultural enterprises operating on vast acreage. Small ranchers found themselves squeezed by cattle companies with investor backing and political connections. Corporate interests increasingly dominated political as well as economic structures. Railroad companies, mining conglomerates, timber interests, and large landholders exercised enormous influence over territorial and early state governments. Water rights, mineral claims, grazing access, and timber concessions were allocated through processes that typically favored those with financial and political power. This transition from frontier to integrated region wasn't simply economic, but cultural. The rough-edged mining camp or cattle town gradually acquired institutions signaling permanence and connection to wider society. Banks, schools, churches, newspapers, theaters, and fraternal organizations. Streets were surveyed and sometimes paved. Wooden structures were replaced with brick and stone buildings. For many who had been attracted to the frontier precisely because of its freedom from Eastern constraints, these changes represented unwelcome domestication of the wild spaces they had sought. Some continually moved westward ahead of advancing civilization, seeking new frontiers. Part of this transformation involved the taming, or at least management, of frontier violence. The iconic gunfighters and outlaws who would later dominate Western mythology operated in a specific historical window when formal law enforcement was establishing itself against pre-existing systems of personal and community violence. By the 1882nd and 1892nd, professional police forces and court systems had replaced vigilante justice in most established communities. Though remote areas still saw occasional eruptions of frontier-style conflict resolution, the legendary figures who captured public imagination, Wild Bill Hickok, Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid, Jesse James, operated in this transitional period, often moving back and forth between legal and illegal activities as circumstances changed. Their later mythologization obscured the complex, often morally ambiguous reality of their lives. As evening approaches on your final day in the Wild West, you contemplate the gap between frontier reality and the mythology that would later emerge from it. Why did Americans, and eventually the world, become so fascinated with a romanticized version of this brutal period? Part of the answer lies in timing. The most intense period of frontier mythology making occurred precisely as the actual frontier was disappearing. Wild West shows of Buffalo Bill Cody began in the 1882nd, featuring staged reenactments of Indian battles and stage coach robberies for Eastern audiences, even as railroads, telegraph lines, and formal governments were integrating Western regions into mainstream society. These performances weren't meant as accurate historical recreations, but as entertainment that resonated with Eastern ideas about the West. Dime novels that popularized exaggerated tales of Western heroes originated not on the frontier, but in Eastern publishing houses. Written by authors who rarely had first-hand experience of the regions they described, these formulaic stories emphasized action, clear moral distinctions between heroes and villains, and a vision of the West as a testing ground for American virtues. Later, Hollywood Westerns further refined and amplified these mythological elements, creating iconic images of lone cowboys, heroic sheriffs, dastardly outlaws, and savage Indians that bore little resemblance to historical reality. These films served psychological and cultural functions beyond entertainment. They offered reassuring narratives about American identity during periods of rapid social change. The mythology suggested that American character had been forged in frontier conditions, producing exceptional qualities that distinguished the nation. What these myths obscured was the complex, morally ambiguous reality of Western development. The genocide of indigenous peoples, the exploitation of immigrant labor, the environmental devastation, the corporate manipulation of political systems, the deeply divided communities struggling with fundamental questions about identity, governance, and resources. The real West offered no simple moral lessons, but rather a case study in how human societies adapt to challenging conditions, sometimes showing remarkable cooperation and creativity, sometimes descending into exploitation and brutality. As darkness falls once more, you reflect on your brief journey through the unromanticized Wild West. You've experienced firsthand why the average person today, accustomed to abundant food, medical care, physical safety, and countless comforts unknown to frontier dwellers, would likely not survive even a single day in actual conditions of the 1,872nd frontier. The skills, knowledge, physical conditioning, and psychological resilience required for frontier survival represent a way of life so distant from modern experience as to be almost unimaginable. Yet something about this world continues to fascinate us. Perhaps it's the raw honesty of a life stripped to essentials, where tasks have immediate consequences and achievements represent tangible victories against natural constraints. Perhaps it's the community interdependence that emerged from shared challenges, creating connections that transcended differences. Perhaps it's simply the reminder that human beings can endure and even find meaning in conditions far harsher than most of us will ever face. The legacy of the American frontier extends beyond mythology into actual structures and systems that shape modern American life. Property laws, water rights, frameworks, federal-state relationships, approaches to natural resources, and countless other aspects of American governance emerged from frontier-era compromises and conflict. For indigenous peoples, the frontier era represents not a glorious chapter in national expansion, but the devastation of ancient lifeways and the beginning of a long struggle for cultural survival and sovereignty that continues today. The most accurate understanding of the frontier requires holding multiple perspectives simultaneously, acknowledging both the courage of those who built new communities in challenging conditions and the devastation experienced by those displaced by this expansion. As you drift towards sleep on your final night in the Wild West, the sounds of this earlier America surround you. The whisper of wind through prairie grass, the distant howl of coyotes, perhaps faint piano notes from a saloon down the street. These sensory experiences, at least, connected all who lived through this era, regardless of background or circumstance. The vast skies, extreme weather, imposing landscapes, and profound silences shaped everyone who encountered them, creating a shared relationship with the environment, even amid cultural conflict. Tomorrow, you will return to your own time, carrying with you a deeper understanding of this pivotal period. You'll never again see a Western film without recognizing the sanitized, simplified version of complex reality. You'll appreciate the extraordinary comfort and security of modern life achieved through technological advances unimaginable to frontier dwellers. You might find yourself more aware of skills and knowledge lost in transition to our specialized, technology-dependent society. Most importantly, You'll understand that the real story of the American West isn't found in gunfights and gold strikes, but in daily struggles of ordinary people who faced extraordinary challenges with limited resources available to them. Their story, without Hollywood embellishment, contains enough genuine courage, tragedy, innovation, conflict, cooperation, cruelty, and kindness to fill countless histories. The real Wild West disappeared long ago, transformed by technology, population growth, economic integration, and environmental change into the modern American West of cities, suburbs, highways, and managed landscapes. Yet echoes of frontier experience persist in regional identities. Local traditions, land use patterns, and governance structures. The memory of this formative period continues to influence how Americans understand themselves and their nation's development. As you finally surrender to sleep, the boundary between past and present seems to blur. The challenges faced by frontier communities, adapting to environmental constraints, managing scarce resources, building functional communities among diverse populations, balancing individual freedom with collective needs, remain relevant in new forms today. Perhaps the greatest legacy of the frontier experience is not a set of answers, but a collection of questions about human adaptation, community formation, and the relationship between people and the natural world. Questions each generation must answer anew as circumstances change. The stars shine brilliantly above, the same stars that guided travelers across prairies, helped farmers time planting, and gave comfort to homesick immigrants far from familiar landscapes. In this moment of connection across time, you feel a fleeting kinship with those who looked upon these same constellations a century and a half ago, wondering what tomorrow would bring in a world where survival was never guaranteed. Sleep comes at last, and with it dreams of a West both harsh and magnificent. A place where human vulnerability and resilience were displayed in equal measure, where diverse peoples collided and sometimes cooperated in ways that would shape a nation, where daily struggle for existence contained moments of transcendent connection with landscapes of breathtaking grandeur. The real Wild West, stripped of romantic illusion, offers a window into human experience at its most elemental, challenging, frightening, and occasionally sublime. Good night. Traveler, rest well. The frontier may be gone, but its lessons remain, and in understanding what those who came before endured, perhaps we gain perspective on our own challenges and appreciation for the comforts we often take for granted. Sleep peacefully, knowing you're safe from the dangers that haunted every frontier night. The Wild West lives on only in memory now, preserved in stories like these, stories that remind us of our history, with all its complexity, tragedy, and remarkable human perseverance. Let me tell you something most people don't realize about the Wild West. It wasn't just dangerous because of outlaws or Indians or wild animals. It was dangerous because of something far more insidious: loneliness. The kind of loneliness that eats away at your mind until you can't tell what's real anymore. You wake up this morning in your cabin, and the silence is absolute. No traffic sounds, no neighbors, no phones ringing, just silence so complete you can hear your own heartbeat. And you realize you haven't spoken to another human being in 3 days, maybe 4. You've lost count. This is the reality for thousands of frontier settlers, especially women. Imagine being a young bride, brought west by an ambitious husband, He's out working the land, tending cattle, or down in a mine. You're alone in a cabin miles from the nearest neighbor. Days pass without adult conversation, weeks sometimes. Your diary becomes your only companion. Frontier women's diaries from this period make heartbreaking reading. They talk about the silence, the emptiness, the desperate longing for a friendly face, a kind word, any human connection. Some women went months without seeing another woman. The psychological toll was immense. Depression was rampant, though they didn't call it that. They called it prairie melancholy or the lonesome sickness. Some women simply stopped functioning, sitting and staring for hours. Others became violent, lashing out at husbands or children. Some killed themselves. Men suffered too, though differently. The pressure of being solely responsible for family survival in an unforgiving environment broke many. Alcoholism was epidemic among frontier men, not social drinking, desperate, destructive drinking to numb the constant stress and fear. Domestic violence was common and largely ignored. A man could beat his wife with little consequence. She had no legal recourse, nowhere to go, no way to support herself if she left. The isolation that drove her to desperation also trapped her in abusive situations. Children witnessed this violence and carried the trauma. Frontier childhood wasn't innocent or carefree. It was watching parents struggle, sometimes fail, watching siblings die, working like adults from age 6 or 7, learning early that life was hard and often unfair. Let me tell you about family dynamics in the Wild West. They were complicated in ways modern people struggle to understand. Marriage wasn't about love or companionship, though those might develop. Marriage was an economic partnership essential for survival. A man needed a wife to cook, clean, preserve food, make clothing, bear children. A woman needed a husband to provide land, shelter, protection, and income. Love was a bonus, not a requirement. Many couples barely knew each other before marriage. Mail-order brides were common. Women who traveled west to marry men they'd only corresponded with by letter. Imagine that. You're a young woman in the East, poor, with few prospects. You answer an advertisement from a Western man seeking a wife. You exchange a few letters. He seems decent enough in writing. You travel hundreds or thousands of miles to meet him. And when you arrive, you discover he's nothing like his letters suggested. Maybe he's much older than he claimed. Maybe he's cruel. Maybe he's already married and looking for a second wife for a polygamous arrangement. Common in some territories. What do? You have no money to return home. No family nearby. No options. So you marry him and hope for the best. Some of these marriages worked out. Couples developed genuine affection through shared hardship. They built lives together, raised children, supported each other through unimaginable difficulty. These partnerships could be deep and meaningful, forged in adversity. But many marriages were miserable. Couples who disliked each other, trapped together by circumstance, they couldn't divorce easily. Divorce was scandalous, expensive, and left women particularly vulnerable. So they endured, year after year, making each other increasingly bitter. Children in these families learned that marriage was duty, not happiness. They learned to endure rather than expect joy. They learned that love was practical, not romantic. These lessons shaped their own relationships, perpetuating cycles of emotional distance. The physical intimacy of frontier marriage was complicated too. Women were expected to bear children regularly. Birth control was unreliable and often opposed by religious teachings. A woman might be pregnant or nursing almost constantly throughout her fertile years. This was exhausting and dangerous. Each pregnancy risked death. Each birth weakened her body further. Many women were worn out by their 30s, looking decades older than their actual age. Their bodies broke down from constant childbearing, combined with brutal physical labor. Men faced their own pressures around intimacy and family. They were expected to be providers, protectors, to be strong and unemotional. Showing vulnerability was seen as weakness, so they buried their fears, their sadness, their desperation. This emotional suppression took its own toll. The father-son relationship in frontier families was often distant and formal. Fathers taught sons practical skills but rarely showed affection. Physical punishment was standard. A father who was too gentle with his sons was considered weak, failing to prepare them for harsh realities ahead. Mothers and daughters had closer relationships. Usually, daughters learned domestic skills from mothers through constant proximity, but this closeness could be stifling. A daughter had little opportunity to develop independent identity. She was being trained to replicate her mother's life, whether she wanted that or not. Siblings relied on each other in ways modern children don't. They were work partners, playmates, allies in navigating difficult family dynamics. But they also competed for scarce parental attention and limited family resources. Birth order mattered enormously. The eldest son typically inherited the family farm or business. Younger sons had to find their own way. When siblings died, which happened frequently, the grief was complicated. Sadness mixed with relief that there was one less person competing for food and resources. That sounds cruel, but it was survival thinking in an environment where scarcity was constant. Let's talk about aging in the Wild West. Growing old on the frontier was not gentle. There was no retirement, no pension, no social security. You worked until you physically couldn't anymore. And when you couldn't work, you became a burden to your family. Most people didn't live long enough to face this problem. Life expectancy was around 35 to 40 years. But those who did survive into their 60s or 70s often lived in poverty, dependent on children who might resent supporting them. Elderly people who had no family faced grim prospects. Some communities had poor houses where the destitute elderly lived in terrible conditions. Others simply died alone. Their bodies discovered weeks later. There was no safety net, no system to care for those who could no longer care for themselves. The disabled faced similar challenges. A man injured in mining accident, unable to work, became an economic drain on his family. The shame of being unable to provide often led to depression and suicide. A woman crippled by difficult childbirth might be abandoned by her husband for a healthier replacement. Mental illness was particularly poorly understood and handled. People suffering from what we now recognize as PTSD, depression, anxiety, or schizophrenia were often labeled as weak, possessed, or morally deficient. Treatment ranged from prayer to being locked in rooms to being sent to insane asylums where conditions were horrific. Some families dealt with mental illness by simply isolating the affected person. Lock them in a back room or outbuilding. Bring them food. Otherwise ignore them. Out of sight. Out of mind. The suffering of these individuals is difficult to imagine. Now, let me tell you about something that doesn't appear in Western movies. The sheer boredom of frontier life. When you weren't working, which was rare, there was often nothing to do. No television, no internet, no movies, limited reading material, the same people, the same conversations, the same routines, day after day, year after year. This monotony wore people down. The human mind needs stimulation, variety, novelty. Frontier life offered little of these. Some people cracked under the tedium. Others developed odd hobbies or behaviors just to have something different to focus on. Alcohol provided one escape from boredom, which partly explains its prevalence. Gambling was another. Even illegal gambling was common because it offered excitement, risk, something to break the monotony. Towns had informal gambling dens where men bet on cards, dice, even fights between animals or men. For women, gossip became a primary form of entertainment and social connection. When you finally encountered other women, you shared every detail of your lives, discussed everyone you knew, speculated about their affairs. This gossip could be vicious, destroying reputations and relationships, but it was also a way to feel connected, to know you weren't completely alone. Religious revivals and camp meetings provided both spiritual meaning and social entertainment. These gatherings could last days, with people traveling long distances to attend. The emotional intensity of revival preaching offered a release for pent-up feelings. People wept, shouted, fainted, caught up in collective emotional catharsis. Holidays took on enormous importance as breaks from routine. Christmas celebrations might last a week. 4th of July brought entire communities together. These celebrations were anticipated for months, remembered for months afterward. They provided structure to otherwise monotonous years. The relationship with time itself was different on the frontier. Without clocks, in most homes, time was approximated by the sun's position. Appointments were loose. Morning might mean any time between dawn and noon. This casual relationship with time would frustrate modern people accustomed to precise scheduling. Seasons mattered more than days or weeks. Life organized around planting season, growing season, harvest season, winter. The specific date was less important than where you were in the agricultural cycle. This gave life a circular, repetitive quality that could feel either comforting or suffocating, depending on your perspective. Let me tell you about grief in the Wild West. You experienced so much loss that you had to develop different ways of processing it. A mother who buried 4 of her 7 children couldn't afford to grieve each loss fully. She had to continue caring for surviving children, maintaining the household, supporting her husband. Grief became something you carried but didn't indulge. Funerals were often brief and practical. A body couldn't be preserved long in warm weather. Burial happened quickly, sometimes within hours of death. A simple prayer, a marker if you were lucky, then back to work. The dead were gone and life continued. You couldn't dwell on loss when survival demanded constant attention. But the grief accumulated, unprocessed. It manifested in other ways. Depression, anxiety, physical illness, emotional numbness. People on the frontier often seemed hard, emotionally shut down. This wasn't because they didn't feel deeply. It was a protective mechanism against overwhelming sorrow. Some found solace in religion, the promise of heaven, of being reunited with lost loved ones, provided comfort and meaning. Others found solace in work, staying so busy they didn't have time to feel. Still others turned to alcohol or opium, numbing the pain chemically. Think about the accumulated trauma of frontier life. Losing children, siblings, parents, witnessing violence and death, facing constant danger and uncertainty. This trauma shaped entire generations. People raised in these conditions developed tough exteriors but carried deep emotional wounds. This trauma was passed down. Parents who'd never processed their own losses raised children with emotional distance. Those children grew up to repeat the pattern. The stoic, emotionally reserved cowboy of legend, that's not strength, that's intergenerational trauma. As night falls on this, your second to last day in the Wild West, you sit in your cabin and truly understand what this life demanded. Not just physical toughness, though that was essential, but emotional resilience beyond what most modern people possess. The ability to continue after devastating loss, to form connections knowing they might be severed by death or distance, to find meaning in repetitive toil, to maintain hope in the face of constant hardship, to be alone without losing your mind. You think about the people who survived here, not just survived physically, but emotionally and psychologically, the strength that required, the price they paid, the scars they carried, and you realize that the real story of the Wild West isn't about gunfights or gold rushes. It's about ordinary people enduring extraordinary pain, loneliness, and hardship. People who kept going when everything in them wanted to quit, who built lives and families and communities despite crushing obstacles, who found moments of joy amid overwhelming sorrow. The wind howls outside your cabin. Inside, lamplight flickers, creating dancing shadows on the walls. You're alone with your thoughts, as frontier people so often were. And you understand why some couldn't bear it, why some broke, why some simply walked away. But you also understand why some stayed, why they persevered, because humans are remarkably adaptable. We can endure almost anything if we must. We find strength we didn't know we had. We create meaning where none seems to exist. The frontier demanded everything from those who settled it. And somehow, impossibly, many gave everything and survived. Their legacy is more than the towns they built or the land they claimed. It's the proof that human beings can endure the unendurable. As you drift towards sleep, you carry this knowledge with you. Tomorrow is your last day in the Wild West. And you'll face it with new respect for those who lived this life, not for a few days, but for decades, who raised families here, who grew old here, who died here and were buried in unmarked graves on windswept prairies. Their strength echoes across time. Their pain deserves acknowledgement. Their stories deserve to be told truthfully, without romance or myth, because the real story is so much more powerful than any Hollywood fiction. Sleep comes slowly, as it must have for countless frontier settlers, troubled by worries about tomorrow, haunted by losses of yesterday, but enduring because there's no other choice, because giving up means death, because somewhere deep inside, hope persists. That hope, fragile but unbreakable, is perhaps the frontier's greatest legacy. The stubborn human belief that tomorrow might be better. That suffering has meaning. That endurance brings reward. Whether that hope was justified, history can debate. But it sustained people through hell on earth. And in that sense, the frontier settlers were heroes. Not the Hollywood kind with guns and white hats, but real heroes who faced real challenges and somehow, against all odds, survived. Their heroism was quieter, harder, more human, and infinitely more worthy of remembrance. Your last full day in the Wild West dawns cold and clear. As you step outside your cabin, you notice something you've been too busy surviving to fully appreciate until now. the absolute vastness of the landscape. Miles and miles of emptiness, stretching in every direction. No buildings, no roads, no signs of human civilization except your small cabin. This emptiness defined the frontier experience in ways that are hard for modern people to grasp. We live in a world of constant human presence, buildings everywhere, roads connecting everything, the knowledge that help is always nearby. But here, in 1875, you could walk for days without seeing another human being. That emptiness was both freedom and terror. Freedom from the constraints of civilized society. No one watching what you did. No social expectations to meet. You could be whoever you wanted. Reinvent yourself completely. The frontier attracted people seeking this freedom. Criminals fleeing justice. Debtors escaping creditors. Anyone wanting a fresh start. But that same emptiness meant vulnerability. No one to help when you needed it. No safety net. No rescue coming. You were completely responsible for your own survival. And if you failed, you died alone. Possibly undiscovered for months or years. Let me tell you about some of the people who came west seeking that freedom. Outlaws, yes, but also former slaves escaping the oppression of the post-Civil War South. Women fleeing abusive marriages or social scandal. Religious minorities seeking to practice their faith without persecution. Immigrants hoping for opportunities denied them in their homelands. Each brought their own dreams and desperation. For some, the West delivered on its promise. Former slaves established all-black towns where they could live free from white oppression. Some women found independence impossible in the East. Religious groups like the Mormons created entire territories organized around their beliefs. But for many, the West was just a different kind of hell. Black settlers faced racism, even in supposedly free territories. Women discovered that frontier society had its own rigid expectations. Religious minorities sometimes found themselves persecuted even in remote areas. The myth of the West as a place of unlimited freedom and opportunity was always more myth than reality. Yes, there was more physical space, less formal social structure in some ways, but humans carried their prejudices, their cruelties, their hierarchies with them. The frontier didn't erase these things. Sometimes it amplified them. Let's talk about justice on the frontier. Because it was complicated and often brutal, without strong legal institutions, communities developed their own systems. Sometimes these worked reasonably well. Respected community members might mediate disputes, helping parties reach agreements without violence. But often, frontier justice was mob justice. Vigilante committees formed to deal with crime. Sometimes they targeted actual criminals, but just as often, they became tools of prejudice and personal vendettas. A Chinese immigrant accused of theft might be hanged without trial. A Mexican man who looked at a white woman the wrong way might be beaten or killed. Lynching wasn't just a Southern phenomenon. It happened throughout the West, often targeting minorities or anyone who didn't fit community norms. The statistics are horrifying. Hundreds, possibly thousands, of people were lynched in Western territories and states during the frontier period. The victims weren't given trials, weren't allowed to defend themselves, were often killed based on rumor or suspicion rather than evidence, and the perpetrators faced no consequences. Lynching was considered community justice, a legitimate way of maintaining order. Women accused of prostitution or adultery might be forcibly expelled from towns, driven into the wilderness to die. Men accused of being homosexual might be castrated or killed. The frontier could be incredibly cruel to anyone perceived as different or deviant. Even legal justice was harsh. A man convicted of horse theft could be hanged. Horse theft was considered serious because a man's horse was essential for survival. Steal someone's horse and you might be condemning them to death in the wilderness. So horse thieves were shown no mercy. Prisons on the frontier were hellholes. Dark, overcrowded, disease-ridden. Prisoners were sometimes chained in painful positions for weeks. Beatings were routine. Many prisoners died from disease, violence, or neglect before serving their sentences. Now let me tell you about something that might surprise you. There were moments of genuine community and kindness on the frontier. Not everything was suffering and brutality. People did help each other. Sometimes remarkably, when a family's barn burned down, neighbors would gather for barn raising. Everyone contributed labor and materials to help rebuild. When someone fell ill during harvest, others would harvest their crops so the family wouldn't starve. When a woman died in childbirth, other women would care for her children. These acts of communal support weren't just kindness, they were survival strategies. You helped others knowing you might need help someday. You built social capital, creating networks of mutual obligation. But that doesn't make the help less real or less valuable. Frontier communities also created their own entertainment and culture. Musical traditions developed, mixing influences from different immigrant groups. Folk songs and ballads told stories of frontier life, preserving experiences in oral tradition. Dances and social gatherings brought communities together. Storytelling was a major form of entertainment. People gathered to hear travelers' tales, share local gossip, or listen to skilled storytellers spin yarns. The tall tale became an American art form on the frontier, stories growing more exaggerated with each retelling. Some frontier towns developed surprising cultural sophistication. Opera houses were built in mining towns. Theater companies toured remote areas. Lending libraries circulated books. People hungry for culture and connection created it despite challenging circumstances. But let's not romanticize this too much. These moments of community and culture existed alongside the brutality and hardship. The same town that built an opera house might have lynched a Chinese immigrant the week before. The same people who helped with a barn raising might have driven a family off their land through intimidation. As your last day in the Wild West continues, you decide to walk through the town one final time, really observing what you see. You notice things you missed before. Details that tell stories of daily life. The general store's shelves are mostly empty. Supplies haven't arrived in weeks. The storekeeper doesn't know when the next shipment will come. Customers buy what's available, whether they need it or not, knowing it might be months before they can get it again. You see a woman at the store, heavily pregnant, buying fabric. She's making clothes for the baby she'll deliver in a few weeks. With luck, a midwife will be available to help. Without luck, she'll give birth alone or with only her husband's assistance. She might die. The baby might die. Both might die. She knows this, but maintains a calm expression. Outside the store, you see men loading a wagon with supplies for a remote mining camp. The journey will take days through difficult terrain. They're armed because bandits sometimes attack supply wagons. Their weapons are old but well maintained. These men know how to use them because they've had to. You pass the schoolhouse, a small building with a tired-looking teacher inside, instructing about 20 children of varying ages. Through the window, you can see her struggling to keep order. The older boys are restless. probably thinking about the work waiting at home. The younger children are struggling to stay awake in the stuffy room. Education on the frontier was valued but also seen as somewhat optional, especially for boys who would become farmers or ranchers. What did they need book learning for? Practical skills mattered more. Girls were more likely to receive education because teaching was one of the few respectable professions available to women. You see the doctor's office with its faded sign. Inside, if you looked, you'd find limited medical supplies, outdated medical books, and a doctor who does his best with inadequate knowledge and tools. He's lost patients he might have saved with modern medicine. He carries the weight of those losses every day. The saloon is already open despite the early hour. Inside, a few men drink away their sorrows, their wages, their chances at anything better. Alcoholism destroyed countless lives on the frontier. It was both symptom and cause of deeper problems: despair, trauma, inability to cope with harsh realities. You notice a family loading belongings into a wagon, clearly preparing to leave. They're giving up on their frontier dream. Maybe their crops failed repeatedly. Maybe illness killed family members. Maybe they simply couldn't endure anymore. They're returning east, defeated but alive. This was common. For every success story, there were multiple failures. People who went west with high hopes and returned east broken. The frontier tested everyone, and many failed that test. There's no shame in that. The test was impossibly hard. As afternoon wears on, you find yourself at the edge of town. Looking out at the vast landscape, you think about what you've learned during your time here. The reality so different from Hollywood's version. The real Wild West wasn't about heroic cowboys and dramatic showdowns. It was about ordinary people struggling against extraordinary challenges. People who worked themselves to exhaustion just to survive, who buried children and spouses and siblings, who faced loneliness that drove some to madness. It was about people from all over the world, not just white Americans, Chinese, Mexican, Black, European immigrants, Native Americans whose land was being stolen, all trying to survive, to build lives, to find some measure of happiness, or at least peace. It was about women who worked as hard as men, often harder, but received little recognition or legal rights, about children forced to grow up too fast, about elderly people with no safety net, about disabled people with no support. It was about environmental destruction on a massive scale, buffalo slaughtered by the millions, forests clear-cut, rivers polluted, land overgrazed. The frontier transformed the landscape. Not always for the better. It was about violence, yes, but mostly mundane violence, bar fights and domestic abuse. Not dramatic gunfights, but impulsive killings fueled by alcohol and anger, lynch mobs and vigilante justice. The violence of poverty and desperation. But it was also about resilience, about people who endured unimaginable hardship and kept going, who found moments of joy amid suffering, who built communities in howling wilderness, who created culture and meaning despite crushing circumstances. As evening approaches, you return to your cabin one last time. Tomorrow you'll leave the Wild West and return to your comfortable modern life. But tonight, you sit and reflect on what this experience has taught you. You've learned that comfort and safety aren't guaranteed, that previous generations lived with constant danger and uncertainty, that survival required skills and toughness most modern people lack. You've learned that progress came with terrible costs, that the land you might call home was taken from indigenous peoples through violence and broken promises. That building America's West required suffering of countless individuals. You've learned that mythology obscures reality, that the Hollywood West of heroic cowboys is fantasy, that real frontier life was far harder, far less glamorous, far more morally complex than popular culture suggests. You've learned about human adaptability, that people can endure almost anything when necessary, that humans find ways to create meaning, build communities, maintain hope even in desperate circumstances. You've learned about privilege, that your modern life, with its health care, safety, abundant food, and endless opportunities, is built on foundations laid by those who had none of these things, that you've won a lottery of birth, living in a time and place of unprecedented comfort. As darkness falls completely, you prepare for sleep one last time in this harsh world. The wind whispers outside, the cabin creaks. In the distance, a coyote howls. These sounds that have been your companions for days will soon become distant memories. Tomorrow you return to a world of electricity and running water, of grocery stores and hospitals, of laws that are enforced and rights that are protected, of comfort and safety and opportunity. But tonight, you're still here, still experiencing what millions experienced for real, still feeling the weight of frontier existence, and you carry this knowledge with profound respect for those who lived this life, not by choice for a few days, but by necessity for entire lifetimes. The people of the Wild West weren't Hollywood heroes. They were humans, flawed, struggling, often failing. But they persevered, they built, they endured, and their legacy, complicated and morally mixed as it is, shapes the world you'll return to tomorrow. Sleep comes with difficulty, as it must have for countless frontier settlers. Your mind races with everything you've experienced and learned. The hardships, the loneliness, the danger, the small moments of beauty and connection. And you understand, finally, why you wouldn't survive in the Wild West. Not because you're weak, but because survival required specific knowledge, skills, and psychological adaptations that take years to develop, because modern life hasn't prepared you for that level of hardship. The people who survived the frontier were remarkable not because they were superhuman, but because they adapted to impossible circumstances. They paid terrible prices in health, happiness, and lost loved ones. But they survived, and in surviving, they created the foundation for the comfortable world, That's worth remembering, worth honoring, worth understanding beyond the myths and legends. The real Wild West, with all its complexity and tragedy and occasional triumph, tells us profound truths about human nature, about survival, about the costs of progress. As you drift into sleep, you're grateful to return to modern comfort, but also grateful for this glimpse into a harder time, grateful to understand, even briefly, what your ancestors endured, grateful for the lessons that only hardship can teach. The Wild West is gone, its people are gone, but their stories remain. And in telling those stories truthfully, we honor them better than any romantic myth ever could. Your final morning in the Wild West arrives with golden sunlight streaming through gaps in the cabin walls. Today you'll return to your own time. But before you do, let's take one last walk through the reality of frontier existence. As you dress in your rough frontier clothes for the last time, you notice how much your body has changed in just these few days. Your hands are already developing calluses. Your muscles ache in new places. Your skin is sunburned and wind-chapped. A few days did this. Imagine a lifetime. You step outside and the cold morning air hits your lungs. It's a physical shock your body still hasn't adjusted to. Frontier people lived with this discomfort constantly. They didn't have the option of stepping back into climate-controlled comfort. This was their reality. Every day, year after year. Walking through the town one final time, you see it with new eyes. This isn't a movie set. These are real buildings where real people struggled through real hardships. That general store represents someone's entire livelihood. That cabin houses a family fighting to survive. That saloon is where men try to forget their pain, at least temporarily. You notice the cemetery at the edge of town? It's larger than you'd expect for such a small community. Rows of wooden crosses, many without names. Some graves are tiny, heartbreakingly tiny. Children, babies, lives ended before they could truly begin. One marker catches your eye. Sarah Johnson, aged 24, died in childbirth along with her infant son. 1,874. 24 years old. Your age, perhaps dead because she had the misfortune to be born in the wrong century. How many Sarah Johnsons are buried in unmarked graves across the West? Another marker, unknown Chinese laborer, died building the railroad. 1,869. Not even a name, just unknown. A person reduced to their ethnicity and occupation. How many unknown Chinese laborers built America's West? How many died without anyone recording their names? And another, James Morrison, died of thirst in the desert. 1,872. You imagine James Morrison, lost and desperate, watching the sun bake him to death. Did he think about his family? Did he curse his decision to come west? Did he pray, or did he simply suffer in silence until death brought relief? Each grave tells a story of the frontier's brutal reality. This cemetery is a history book written in bones and rotting wood, and it's just one cemetery in one small town. Multiply this by hundreds of towns across the West, and you begin to understand the scale of suffering. You leave the cemetery and walk to the edge of town where the wilderness begins. Out there, beyond the last building, is emptiness, miles of it, beautiful and terrible. The landscape that drew people west with promises of opportunity and killed so many who believed those promises, standing at this boundary between civilization and wilderness. You understand something fundamental about the frontier experience. It was about boundaries, physical boundaries like this one, but also psychological and moral boundaries. The frontier pushed people to their limits. It revealed who they truly were. Some discovered reserves of strength and courage they never knew they possessed. Others discovered darkness within themselves. The frontier didn't make people good or bad. It just removed the social constraints that normally kept their true natures hidden. Think about the violence you've learned about during your time here. Not the Hollywood gunfights, but the real violence, the domestic abuse, the lynchings, the casual cruelty to animals and people. The frontier didn't create violent people, but it created circumstances where violence faced fewer consequences. Think about the kindness too, the barn raisings, the shared harvests, the help offered to strangers. The frontier didn't create kind people, but it created circumstances where kindness was often necessary for mutual survival. The frontier was a mirror. It reflected humanity back at itself, without the softening filters of civilization. What it showed wasn't always pretty, but it was real. As you stand there contemplating, an old man approaches. He's weathered, stooped, probably in his 60s, but looking 80. He's lived his entire adult life on the frontier. He nods at you, and you nod back. Heading out? He asks. His voice rough from years of dust and hard living. Yes, you reply. Going back east. He nods again, understanding. Many people went back east, more than stayed. Probably this land ain't for everyone. He says, looking out at the wilderness. It takes what it takes. Some got it to give, some don't. Ain't no shame either way. His words strike you as the most honest assessment you've heard. The frontier required certain sacrifices. If you couldn't or wouldn't make those sacrifices, you left or you died. Simple as that. What keeps you here, you ask. He's quiet for a long moment, thinking. Finally, he says, don't rightly know anymore. Started out thinking I'd get rich, strike gold or build something. Didn't happen. Lost a wife to fever. Lost 2 children. Got nothing to show for 40 years out here but this. He gestures at his worn body. But going back east now? What would I do there? This is who I am now. For better or worse. There's profound sadness in his words, but also acceptance. He's made his peace with his choices and their consequences. He's a survivor. Even if survival didn't bring happiness, you thank him and start walking back toward your cabin. His words echo in your mind. This land ain't for everyone. That might be the truest thing anyone could say about the Wild West. Back at the cabin, you gather the few possessions you've accumulated. Not much. The frontier teaches you quickly that possessions weigh you down, that the things you need are different from the things you want. That simplicity isn't a choice, but a necessity. As you prepare to leave, you think about what you'll take with you beyond these physical items. What lessons does the Wild West offer to modern people? First, comfort and safety are privileges, not rights. Previous generations lived without them. Future generations might too. Don't take them for granted. Second, community matters. Humans are social creatures. We need each other, especially in hard times. The rugged individualist myth is just that. A myth. Nobody survives alone. Third, resilience can be developed. People aren't born tough. They become tough through experience, through necessity. Modern life might make us soft, but the capacity for resilience still exists within us. Fourth, progress has costs. The comfortable modern world was built on the suffering of those who came before. Acknowledging those costs doesn't diminish progress. It honors those who paid the price. Fifth, mythology obscures truth. The stories we tell ourselves about the past are often comforting lies, seeking truth, even when uncomfortable, is important for understanding who we are and how we got here. Sixth, adaptation is the key to survival. The people who thrived on the frontier were those who could adapt quickly to changing circumstances. That lesson applies to any era, including our own. Seventh, meaning can be found in suffering. The frontier was harsh, but people still found purpose, created beauty, built communities. Humans are remarkably good at creating meaning even in difficult circumstances. As the sun reaches its peak, you take one last look around. At the rough cabin that's been your home, at the town that's been your world, at the vast landscape beyond, you're saying goodbye to a place and time that tested you, taught you, changed you. You think about the millions who lived this life for real, who didn't have the option of returning to modern comfort, who endured until they couldn't endure anymore, or until death took them. Their strength deserves recognition. Their suffering deserves acknowledgement. Their stories deserve to be told truthfully. The Wild West wasn't a romantic adventure. It was a brutal test of human endurance. Many failed that test through no fault of their own. The land was too harsh, the circumstances too difficult, the luck too bad. Their failure doesn't diminish them. It highlights how extraordinary those who succeeded truly were. But success itself is a complicated concept. Is a person successful who survived 40 years on the frontier but buried multiple children and lost all their dreams? Is a person a failure who returned east after 5 years but left alive and sane? The frontier doesn't offer easy answers. What it does offer is perspective. When modern life seems hard, remember the frontier. When you think you're at your limit, remember what your ancestors endured. Not to minimize your struggles. Those are real, but to remind yourself that humans can bear more than they think possible. The frontier also offers warning. It shows what happens when we prioritize expansion over humanity. When we value land and resources more than people and cultures. When we allow mythology to replace truth. These lessons remain relevant. As you prepare to leave, you feel a strange reluctance, despite the hardship, despite everything you've learned about the brutal reality. Part of you has connected with this place and time. There's something compelling about life stripped to essentials, about challenges that are immediate and physical, rather than abstract and digital. But you also feel profound relief. You're grateful to return to modern medicine that can treat infections and ease pain, to abundant food and clean water, to safety and comfort and opportunity, to a world where survival isn't your only goal. This tension, attraction and revulsion, is probably what many frontier people felt too. They hated the hardship but found meaning in it. They yearned for easier lives but took pride in their toughness. They wanted to leave, but something kept them there. As the day begins to fade, you close your eyes and prepare to return to your own time. The sounds of the frontier fill your ears one last time. Wind through grass, distant animals calling, the creak of buildings settling, the murmur of human voices carrying on despite everything. When you open your eyes, you're back in your own comfortable world. Soft bed, climate control, lights at the touch of a switch, running water, all the conveniences you take for granted, and for a moment they seem miraculous. You survived the Wild West, not for a lifetime, but for a brief visit. And that's enough to teach you profound respect for those who lived it for real. Those ordinary people who faced extraordinary hardships and somehow kept going. Their legacy is complex. The frontier brought terrible suffering, especially to indigenous peoples displaced and destroyed. It was built on exploitation and environmental destruction. It reflected the worst of human nature alongside the best. But it also represents something important about the human spirit, our capacity to endure, to adapt, to find meaning in hardship, to build communities in hostile environments, to hope even when hope seems foolish. The Wild West is gone now, transformed into the modern American West of cities and highways and suburban comfort. But its lessons remain. Its stories, when told truthfully, teach us about ourselves, our history, our capacity for good and evil. As you settle back into modern life, you carry these lessons with you. You'll never watch a Western movie the same way. You'll never take your comfort for granted. You'll never forget what people endured to build the world you inhabit. And perhaps most importantly, you'll remember that you wouldn't have survived, not because you're weak, but because survival required specific adaptations you don't have. The frontier people weren't better than you. They were different from you, shaped by different circumstances. Their toughness came at terrible cost. Many were emotionally damaged, physically broken, psychologically scarred. They sacrificed health, happiness, years of life. Was it worth it? That's not for us to judge. They did what they had to do. They survived as best they could. In honoring them, we don't need to romanticize their experience. We can acknowledge both their strength and their suffering. We can appreciate their achievements while recognizing the cost. We can learn from their story without pretending it was glorious. The real Wild West, stripped of mythology, is more powerful than any Hollywood fiction. It's a story of human beings pushed to their absolute limits. Some broke, some endured, all suffered. And from their struggle emerged the modern world, for better and worse. So rest now. Dream of vast prairies and towering mountains, of small cabins and rough towns, of people who lived harder lives than you can imagine. And wake grateful. Grateful for comfort, grateful for safety, grateful for the sacrifices of those who came before. The Wild West tested everyone who entered it. Most would fail that test today. But understanding what the test required helps us appreciate both how far we've come and what we've lost in the journey. The frontier's gone, but its lessons endure. Sleep well, traveler. You've survived a journey through America's toughest chapter. You've seen reality behind the myth. You've learned truths that popular culture obscures. Carry these lessons forward. Share these stories. Remember those who suffered to build the comfortable world you inhabit. And when life seems hard, when challenges feel overwhelming, remember the Wild West. Remember what humans can endure. Remember that you carry within you the same resilience that kept frontier people going through unimaginable hardship. You are descended from survivors. Their strength flows in your veins. Their endurance lives in your DNA. The frontier may be gone, but its legacy remains in everyone who calls America home. Good night. Rest peacefully. The Wild West can't hurt you now. It lives only in memory, in stories, in the lessons we draw from its brutal history. But those lessons are worth keeping close. They remind us who we were, who we are, and who we might become. The frontier is closed. The story continues. And you're part of that story, connected across time to everyone who struggled and survived before you. That connection is worth honoring, worth preserving, worth remembering as long as memory remains. Sleep well, knowing you're safe. The Wild West is history now, but its truth, finely told without romance or mythology, lives on. In understanding that truth, we honor those who lived it, and in honoring them, we better understand ourselves. Good night from the Sleepy Law Library. Until next time, may your dreams be gentle and your appreciation for modern comfort be deep. The past has much to teach us, if we're willing to listen without the distortion of myth. Sleep now, and remember, you wouldn't survive the Wild West. But you don't have to. And that's a blessing worth celebrating.